The silence of the Vatican's secret archives is not like other silences. It is not the peaceful hush of a library at dusk, nor the empty quiet of a deserted hall. It is a dense, heavy, and watchful silence, a silence that has absorbed the whispers of centuries, the scratching of quills on papal decrees, the soft footfalls of scholars, and the weighted sighs of history itself. It is a silence that feels less like an absence of sound, and more like a presence, the collected breath of 2 millennia, holding itself in, waiting. It was in this profound and suffocating quiet that Father Leo Brennan first felt the cold finger of unease trace its way down his spine. He was a man built for such places. In his late 50s, with a lean frame that seemed to have been shaped by years of bending over ancient texts, Father Brennan possessed a patience that was legendary even among the Jesuits. His eyes, a pale blue behind wire-rimmed spectacles, were accustomed to the pale glow of the archival lamps. 2 deciphering scripts so faded they were like the ghosts of words. His posting to the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum was the culmination of a lifetime of devout scholarship, a dream he had nurtured since his own seminary days in Dublin. He was here to assist in the cross-referencing of a vast collection of 13th century papal correspondence, a task of sublime tedium that, to him, was a form of prayer. The room he worked in was a long, high-vaulted chamber, one of many that formed the labyrinthine complex of the archives. Endless rows of dark walnut shelves stretched into the gloom, each one laden with volumes bound in cracked leather and metal clasps. The air smelled of dust, of slowly decaying parchment, of old incense, and something else, something metallic and cold, like the scent of time turning to rust. It was a place out of time, a fortress of memory guarded by a formidable bureaucracy and the unblinking eyes of Swiss guards stationed at every junction. On this particular day, a Tuesday that had begun like any other, Father Brennan was deep in the Fondo Consili, a section pertaining to ancient church councils. His task was to locate a specific folio referenced in a digitized index, a needle in a haystack of unimaginable proportions. The index number, Concilium Tridentinum, Misc, Epist, Exect, 9, had led him to a remote aisle, one that felt colder and less frequented than the others. The lights here were motion-activated, flickering on with a dull hum as he passed, only to plunge the path behind him back into darkness. He found the shelf, its wood warped with age, and ran his finger along the spines of the volumes. The codex he sought was large, heavier than most, bound in a peculiar, almost black leather that felt strangely smooth, almost like skin, under his touch. He had to use both hands to wrestle it from its tight berth, the other books sighing as they shifted to fill the space. Carrying it to a nearby wooden lectern, he laid it down with a soft thud that echoed faintly in the still air. The cover was unmarked, devoid of any title or insignia. The clasp, however, was unusual. It was not iron or brass, but a tarnished silver, intricately wrought into the form of a serpent eating its own talon, or a baris, a symbol of eternity. Yes, but one that felt out of place here, in this bastion of Catholic orthodoxy. A faint prickle of curiosity stirred within him. He undid the clasp, which opened with a quiet, precise click, and lifted the cover. The pages within were vellum, of a high quality that had withstood the centuries far better than the paper of later centuries. The script was a meticulous Gothic minuscule, the work of a highly skilled scribe. It was, as the index had suggested, a collection of letters and memoranda from the period of the Council of Trent. He began to read, his mind slipping into the familiar rhythm of translation and comprehension. There were discussions on sacraments, debates on clerical discipline, notes on the reform of the liturgy. It was exactly what he had expected to find. It was when he was nearing the end of the volume that he found the anomaly. Several pages had been sewn together with a coarse, dark thread, effectively concealing their contents. This was not uncommon. Censorship and redaction were historical facts within the Church, a way to protect doctrine or hide embarrassing episodes. Usually, such pages were simply pasted together or had ink poured over them. This deliberate, almost violent stitching was different. It spoke of a desire not just to conceal, but to imprison the words within. His scholar's instinct overrode his obedience. Using the tip of a slender letter opener from the lectern, he began, carefully, to work at the threads. They were old and brittle, and they came away in coarse fragments. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic beat that seemed obscenely loud in the sacred silence. He felt a thrill of transgression, the sense that he was crossing a boundary that had been maintained for centuries. Finally, the last thread snapped. He carefully parted the now free pages. What was revealed was not another official memorandum. The script here was different, hurried, jagged, a personal hand writing under great duress or fear. It was a diary entry, undated, and it was written in a mix of Latin and an archaic Italian dialect that was difficult to parse. He leaned closer, the lamplight casting his own shadow over the anxious words. "The painter has come again from Florence," the entry began. "He asks the same questions. He seeks not to glorify God, but to interrogate heaven. His obsession is a fever. He demands of me, where is he? Where is the one who fell, not in pride, but in compassion?" The church paints him as a demon, a beast, but the older texts, the ones you lock away, they whisper another name. "I fear the man is a heretic, but His Eminence insists we tolerate him for the sake of his patronage and his genius. But genius allied to heresy is a dangerous fire." Father Brennan's breath caught in his throat. The writer, clearly a cleric of some standing, was deeply troubled. He read on, the text becoming more agitated. "Today he showed me a sketch, a being of terrible and beautiful contradiction, wings not of light, but of shifting storm and shadow, a face holding both divine peace and an infinite, mortal sorrow. This is he," the painter said, his eyes burning, "the angel of paradox, the one who wept for God." He claims to have found fragments of a story in texts older than Rome, a story the church has tried to unmoor from history. He speaks of an angel who, at the moment of creation, looked upon the suffering that would be inherent in a world of free will and chose not to stand in obedient glory, but to kneel in solidarity with the unborn souls of humanity. For this act of ultimate compassion, which challenged the divine hierarchy, he was not cast into hell like the prideful Lucifer, but erased. His name was scoured from the celestial records, his existence denied, his very memory declared a perversion. The painter seeks to restore him to art, to history. He seeks to paint him in the very heart of Christendom. "I must bring this to the cardinal. This cannot be allowed. To give form to a heresy is to give it breath. This angel must never be found." The entry ended abruptly. Father Brennan turned the page, his hands trembling. The subsequent pages were missing, roughly torn from the binding. All that remained was a single word, scrawled in the margin in a different, later hand, as if added as a final, desperate footnote. A name, Veritas. He stared at the word, Latin, truth. For a long moment, he could not move. The watchful silence of the archives pressed in on him, now feeling less like a presence and more like a threat. He had stumbled upon a secret, not a historical curiosity, but a living, breathing heresy that had been deliberately buried. An angel that the church itself had tried to erase. The angel of paradox, the one who wept for God, and a name, Veritas. The sound of a footfall on the stone floor, firm and measured, echoed from the end of the aisle. The motion-sensitive lights flickered on, one by one, marching toward his position. Someone was coming, with a speed that surprised him. Father Brennan snapped the great codex shut, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet. His heart was a frantic drum. He had just enough time to slip the book back onto its shelf and turn, attempting to compose his features into their usual mask of scholarly calm, as the prefect of the archives, Archbishop Alfonso Valenti, emerged from the gloom. The archbishop's face was a placid mask of authority, but his eyes, sharp and miss-nothing, scanned Father Brennan, the lectern, the shelf behind him. "Father Brennan," the archbishop said, his voice a smooth, low baritone that seemed engineered for this exact acoustic space. "I did not expect to find anyone in this section today. I was following an index reference." "Your Eminence," Brennan said, hoping his voice did not betray the tremor in his hands. The Tridentine Archbishop Valenti's gaze lingered on the shelf where the black-bound codex now resided. A faint, almost imperceptible frown touched his lips. An obscure choice. Find anything of interest. The question hung in the air, innocent and lethal. Father Brennan met the archbishop's gaze. In that moment, he made a choice to conceal the truth he had just uncovered. "Nothing of consequence, I'm afraid," he heard himself say. A few notes on liturgical reform, the usual dry fare. The archbishop studied him for a heartbeat longer, then nodded slowly. "The usual dry fare," he repeated. "Indeed. Well, do not let me keep you from your work, Father." He did not move. It was a dismissal, but one that required Father Brennan to walk past him, under his scrutiny. As he did, He felt the Archbishop's eyes on him, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled his soul, that he had just lied to one of the most powerful men in the Vatican, and that the man knew it. He had found the whisper, and now the silence was hunting him. The walk back to his small Spartan apartment within the Vatican walls was a journey through a changed world. The familiar corridors, the grand paintings of saints and popes lining the walls, the soft echo of his own footsteps on the polished marble, everything seemed newly sinister, charged with a hidden meaning. The name Veritas echoed in his mind, a silent mantra of terrifying implication. Truth. Was it the angel's name, or a defiant label placed upon the heresy by the unknown cleric who had recorded it? The angel of paradox, the one who wept for God. The concepts were so profound, so theologically explosive, that they felt less like a historical curiosity and more like a live wire brushing against the dry tinder of his faith. He locked his door, a futile gesture against the pervasive presence of the institution he served, and sat at his simple wooden desk. His hands were still unsteady. He needed context. The diary fragment had mentioned a painter from Florence, a man of genius and heresy, working during the Council of Trent. The time frame was the mid-16th century. His mind, a well-organized library of church history and art, began to cross-reference the great painters of that era. Michelangelo was in Rome, working on the Last Judgment, but he was an old man by the time of Trent. There were others, of course, dozens of talented artists drawn to the heart of Christendom. But one detail stuck out: the painter's obsession. He was not seeking to glorify God in the traditional sense, but to interrogate heaven. He was looking for a specific, forbidden subject, and he had the patronage to allow him to ask dangerous questions. Father Brennan's thoughts flew to the art housed in the very buildings around him. Could it be? Could a representation of this erased angel exist, hidden in plain sight, disguised within the vast iconographic program of the Vatican itself? The idea was dizzying. He opened his laptop, its modern glow a stark contrast to the vellum he had just been handling, and began to search through digital archives of Vatican art from the 1550s and 1560s. Hours bled into one another. He pored over frescoes, altarpieces, and sketches. He studied the works of Federico Zuccari, of Taddeo Zuccari, of Giorgio Vasari himself, who had worked in the Vatican during that period. He found nothing overtly heretical, nothing matching the description of an angel with wings of shifting storm and shadow. Frustration began to set in. Perhaps he had misjudged. Perhaps the painter had never realized his ambition. Perhaps the church had stopped him. It was well past midnight when he decided to cast a wider net, searching for any artist who had run afoul of the Inquisition during the Tridentine period. The name that emerged from the historical record, not as a major figure like Michelangelo, but as a brilliant and controversial secondary master, was Silvano Raffaelli, a Florentine by training, a protégé of Bronzino, known for his unnervingly psychological portraits and his mystical, often dark, religious compositions. The historical record on Raffaelli was patchy. He had enjoyed brief patronage from a powerful cardinal within the Curia, a man known for his intellectual curiosity and his extensive library of occult and philosophical texts. Then Raffaelli had simply vanished from public view around 1563, at the height of the council. Some art historians speculated he had died of plague. Others hinted at a darker fate, a quiet disappearance at the hands of the Inquisition for unspecified doctrinal irregularities. Cardinal Valerio Ludovici. Brennan's pulse quickened. The diary had mentioned his eminence. Could it be? Ludovici was a fascinating and ambiguous figure, a prince of the church who corresponded with alchemists and Neoplatonists, a man who walked the razor's edge between faith and forbidden knowledge. He searched for any existing works by Raffaelli. There were few, a handful of portraits in private collections, a damaged altarpiece in a small church in Umbria, and a series of preparatory sketches for a never-completed fresco cycle. The location of the proposed fresco cycle was listed as the Cappella di San Giovanni della Penitenza, a small, private chapel attached to the Vatican Library, now used primarily for storage and rarely visited. The sketches themselves were digitally archived. Brennan clicked on the first image. It was a study of a saint's face, full of light and piety. The next was a compositional layout. The third made the breath catch in his throat. It was a chalk study, smudged and faded with time, but unmistakable. A winged figure. But this was no serene messenger of God. The anatomy was powerful, almost unsettlingly real. The wings were not the usual elegant white pinions. They were a chaotic, energetic swirl of dark and light strokes, suggesting not feathers, but cloud, shadow, and turbulent energy. The face was turned partially away, but in its profile, Brennan saw it. The divine peace and the infinite, mortal sorrow. It was the very image the diarist had described. The angel of paradox. Brennan stared at the screen, his heart hammering. So the painter had gotten far enough to create studies. He had given form to the heresy. What had happened to him, and what of the chapel? Was there more? Sleep was impossible. As the first grey light of dawn touched the windows of Rome, Father Brennan was already dressed and moving through the still quiet corridors. The Cappella di San Giovanni della Penitenza was not on the tourist maps. It was tucked away in a forgotten corner of the vast apostolic palace, behind a door that looked no different from any other administrative office door. He had to consult old architectural plans to find it. The key was held by the prefect's office. Requesting it would raise an immediate red flag, especially after his encounter with Archbishop Valenti. He would need another way. His opportunity came later that morning. A delivery of new climate control units for the archives was being maneuvered through the narrow hallways, causing a minor chaos of workmen, carts, and distracted officials. In the confusion, Brennan managed to slip into the supply closet, where the older, less frequently used keys were kept. His hands, steady now with purpose, found the heavy iron key labeled cap. He pocketed it, his skin crawling with the sin of theft. He waited until the post-lunch lull, when the halls were at their quietest. His journey felt like a descent into the underworld. He left the bustling main thoroughfares for increasingly older, dustier passageways. The air grew colder. Finally, he stood before an unassuming oak door, its surface blackened with age. The key turned in the lock with a grinding shriek that seemed to scream his transgression to the silent stones. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The chapel was small, cold, and shrouded in shadows. It smelled of damp stone and neglect. Pews were stacked against one wall under white dust sheets. Crates of old documents and unused liturgical vessels were piled haphazardly. But his eyes were drawn immediately to the walls. The frescoes were there, but they were a ruin. Large sections had been deliberately defaced, scrubbed away by some brutal hand, leaving only ghostly outlines and patches of raw plaster. Other areas were obscured by a thick, dark grime of centuries of soot and neglect. It was a scene of deliberate destruction. His heart sank. They had done it. They had erased it. He walked slowly down the narrow central aisle, his flashlight beam playing over the devastation. He could make out the remnants of traditional scenes, a fragment of a crucifixion, the face of a weeping Madonna, but in the spaces between, there were larger, more enigmatic forms, swirls of dark pigment, suggestions of immense, powerful wings. Then, at the very back of the chapel, in the semidome of the apse, he saw it. The defacement here was less complete. The soot was thicker, as if someone had tried to smoke the painting into oblivion, but the curvature of the wall and the height of the dome had protected it from the worst of the physical scraping. Moving a rickety wooden ladder from against a wall, he positioned it under the apse and climbed. His flashlight held tight. He pulled a soft cloth from his pocket and, with a trembling hand, began to gently wipe away the grime from a small section. The paint beneath was vibrant, shockingly so. It was a masterpiece of color and shadow. He cleared more space, his movements becoming more frantic. He revealed an eye. It was not the fierce, judgmental eye of a Byzantine Christ, nor the gentle eye of a saint. It was an eye filled with a deep cosmic sadness, a wisdom forged in an unimaginable loss. It was the eye from Raffaelli's sketch. He wiped faster, revealing a cheek, a strong jaw, a cascade of hair that seemed made of living shadow. This was the central figure. This was the angel. And then his light caught something else. In the background, almost hidden in the tumultuous painting of the wings, were other figures. Not saints, not demons. They were human souls, countless of them, looking up at the angel not in fear or adoration, but with a look of recognition and comfort, as if this celestial being, this outcast from heaven, was their sole advocate, their companion in suffering. But it was the angel's hands that finally stole the air from Brennan's lungs. They were not raised in blessing or holding a sword of justice. They were outstretched, palms up, in a gesture of ultimate offering. And from a wound in each palm, identical to the stigmata of Christ, flowed not light, but a dark, star-strewn substance that cascaded down over the figures below, not burning them, but enveloping them in a shroud of peaceful, protective night. The angel of paradox, the one who wept for God. He had not just been erased, he had been crucified. Father Brennan leaned his forehead against the cold plaster, overcome by the image's terrible power. This was not heresy. This was something else entirely, a theology of unbearable compassion. A challenge so profound it could unravel the very foundation of divine justice. The sound of the chapel door opening below him was like the crack of doom. He froze, his light still trained on the angel's face. "I thought I might find you here, Father Brennan," said the calm, measured voice of Archbishop Valenti. "It seems your interest in dry fare is more visual than I had anticipated." The voice from below was not loud, but it seemed to suck all the sound from the chapel, leaving a vacuum of pure dread. Father Brennan's grip on the ladder tightened, his knuckles white. Slowly, he turned his head to look down. Archbishop Valenti stood in the center of the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back. He was not looking at Brennan, but past him, at the partially revealed fresco in the apse. His face was an unreadable mask of ecclesiastical authority, but in the dim light, Brennan thought he saw a flicker of something else in the man's eyes, not anger, but a deep, weary resignation. "It is a remarkable thing, is it not?" Valenti said, his voice echoing softly in the hollow space. "Even in its ruin, it retains a certain power, a dangerous power." Brennan descended the ladder, his movements stiff with fear and a strange, defiant shame. He reached the stone floor and faced his superior. "Your Eminence, I can explain. Can you?" Valenti asked, his gaze finally settling on Brennan. "Can you explain why a trusted scholar of this holy see would steal a key, skulk through forgotten passages, and deface church property to uncover a heresy that was rightly condemned and hidden centuries ago?" The word deface struck Brennan. "I was cleaning it, not defacing it. I was trying to understand. Understanding is not always our mandate, Father Brennan. Obedience is." Valenti took a step closer, his eyes scanning the younger priest's face. "You read the diary, the one in the Tridentine Codex, the one with the Ouroboros clasp." It was not a question. He knew. He had known all along. "Yes," Brennan admitted, his shoulders slumping. There was no point in denial. "And the name Veritas?" Valenti pressed. "I saw it. I don't know what it means." A long silence stretched between them. Valenti sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the archives themselves. "It is not a name. It is a warning, a label. It means that the content so marked is a truth, so dangerous that its very existence is a threat to the faith of millions. It is a truth that must be protected from believers, for their own good." He looked back up at the fresco. "This concept is such a truth. Is it a truth?" Though Brennan heard himself ask, his voice stronger than he felt. "Or is it just a story the church feared?" Valenti's eyes snapped back to him, and for the first time, Brennan saw a spark of intensity behind the placid exterior. "Do you think we are fools? Do you think generations of theologians, saints, and popes simply feared a story? This is not some fairy tale, Brennan. It is a theological virus. It presents a beautiful, compassionate, and utterly damning alternative to the divinely ordained order of creation. It suggests that the absolute sovereignty of God can be challenged, not by pride, but by a love that equals his own. It creates a schism in the very heart of heaven. It is the most seductive poison ever conceived." He began to pace slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing. The painter, Raffaelli, was a vessel for this poison. He was a genius, yes, but he was also a man who dabbled in things far beyond his understanding. He was a seeker of hidden knowledge, and he found a strand of something ancient, something pre-Christian, something that should have remained lost. He believed he was restoring a lost part of God's story. In reality, he was trying to introduce a flaw into the diamond of doctrine. "What happened to him?" Brennan asked, his scholarly curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "He was given a choice," Valenti said, stopping his pace. "Oblivion or obedience. He chose obedience. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest, painting innocuous Madonnas for a remote monastery. His work here was ordered destroyed. As you can see, the job was fervent, but not entirely thorough. And the diary, the one who wrote it, a secretary to Cardinal Ludovici, a man torn between his duty and his fascination. He confessed his weakness. The diary was secured, and he did penance for the rest of his days. Valenti turned fully to face Brennan. "And now, Father, we come to you. You have been given the same choice Raffaele was given. You have stumbled into a room that is locked for a reason. You can turn around, walk away, and forget you ever saw any of this. You can continue your valuable work, and this incident will be forgotten. Or, Brennan whispered, or you can choose to understand. And in doing so, you will step into a prison far more effective than any cell. The prison of a truth you can never share. A knowledge that will isolate you from every other soul on earth, including your God. It is a lonely path, Father Brennan. I do not recommend it." The choice was laid before him. The safe, obedient return to his quiet scholarship, to the known world of faith and doctrine, or the dangerous, terrifying pursuit of a ghost, an erased angel that promised to shatter his understanding of everything. He thought of the angel's eyes on the wall, the infinite sorrow, the profound compassion. He thought of the hands, offering a stigmata of solidarity, not salvation. "I have to know," Brennan heard himself say. The words were out before he could stop them, surprising even him. Archbishop Valenti studied him for a long, silent moment. The resignation in his eyes deepened. He nodded slowly. "So be it." He did not sound angry. He sounded almost sad. "Follow me." He led Brennan out of the chapel, locking the door behind them. But instead of turning back toward the main archives or the administrative offices, Valenti led him deeper into the oldest part of the complex, through a series of doors that required ancient, ornate keys from a ring he carried. They descended a narrow, winding staircase, the air growing cold and still older. "You believe the archives are a single entity," Valenti said, his voice low as they walked. "They are not. There is the archive presented to the world, 2 scholars. Then there are the Archivia Interna, the internal records. And then," he paused before a massive, iron-reinforced door, "there is the Sanctorum Arcanum, the sanctuary of secrets. This is where the church keeps the things that must never, ever be found." He unlocked the door. The room within was small, circular, and lined with shelves not of wood, but of stone. The air was frigid and mechanically controlled. There were only a dozen or so items here, each resting on a velvet cushion under a glass dome. A scroll of dark papyrus, a book bound in what looked like tarnished silver, a jagged piece of stone with faint, impossible markings. Valenti went to a specific dome. Beneath it lay a single, crumbling sheet of vellum, covered in a script that was not Latin or Greek. It was a series of angular, geometric symbols, utterly alien. "This is the source," Valenti said quietly. "As far as we know, the original, it was found in the ruins of a temple in Mesopotamia, sealed in a jar. It is written in a language that has no name, because no human mouth ever spoke it. It is a celestial language, the language of angels." Brennan stared, his heart thudding against his ribs. "It is a fragment of a much larger text," Valenti continued, "a chronicle of the first moments of creation. It speaks of the hosts of heaven, witnessing the blueprint for humanity. They saw the beauty of free will, but they also saw its inevitable consequence, suffering. Most accepted this as the inscrutable will of God. One did not." He pointed a slender finger at a specific cluster of symbols. "This is the closest our linguists have come to a translation of his name. It does not translate. It is a concept. The angel of the ultimate empathy." He argued that to create beings capable of such pain without sharing in it was a form of divine cruelty. He proposed that the angels should incarnate alongside humanity, should bear the burden of physical and spiritual anguish as companions, not overseers. Valenti's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as if reciting a dangerous chemical formula. This was not an act of rebellion against God, but an act of disagreement with God, a challenge to the divine plan itself. For this, he was not cast into hellfire. His sin was too pure, his motive too compassionate for such a punishment. Instead, he was unmade, his essence was scattered, his name erased from the celestial record, his very existence denied. To speak of him was to speak a lie. To believe in him was to believe in a heresy that denies God's perfect wisdom and justice. He became the angel that never was. He turned to Brennan, his face grave. "This is the truth of Veritas. This is the poison. It creates a second center of compassion in the universe, a rival to Christ himself. It suggests that God's plan needed correction, that a mere angel knew better. It is the ultimate arrogance, disguised as the ultimate humility. This is what Raffaele found. This is what you have found." and now you understand why it must remain buried." Father Brennan looked from the ancient, terrifying text to the face of the Archbishop. He had his answer. He had the truth. And Archbishop Valenti was right. It was a prison. He felt the walls of it closing around him already, a solitude of knowing something that could never be spoken. "What happens now?" Brennan asked, his voice hollow. "Now," Valenti said, "you live with it. You will continue your work. You will speak of this to no one. You will be watched. The door to this room will be locked again, and you will never see it. You will carry this knowledge to your grave, and you will pray to God that it does not consume your faith from the inside out. This is the price of understanding, Father Brennan. This is the cost of looking upon the face of the angel God erased." The iron door of the Sanctorum Arcanum sealed shut behind them with a finality that echoed in Father Brennan's soul. The return journey through the labyrinthine passages was conducted in a silence more profound than any he had experienced in the archives. Archbishop Valenti did not speak, and Brennan had no words left. The symbols on that ancient vellum were burned onto his retina, the angular, alien script that contained a truth so devastating it had to be quarantined from creation itself. Back in the familiar, sun-dappled corridors of the modern Vatican, the world seemed ludicrously normal. Priests nodded greetings. Tourists chattered in excited whispers. The business of the Holy See carried on, blissfully unaware of the tectonic shift that had just occurred in the foundation of one man's reality. Brennan felt like a ghost moving among the living, separated by an invisible pane of glass. He carried a universe of heresy inside him, and the weight of it was crushing. Valenti paused outside Brennan's office. "Your work on the Tridentine correspondence will be reassigned," he said, his tone now that of a benign administrator. "I have another project for you, a cataloguing of 17th century hagiographies. It is detailed, consuming work. It will require your full attention." It was not a suggestion. It was a life sentence of mundane scholarship, a deliberate anesthetic for a mind that had tasted a forbidden stimulant. Brennan simply nodded. "The choices we make define us," Father Valenti added, his gaze lingering for a moment. "You chose knowledge. Now, you must learn to live with it. Remember, you are not the first. The Church has centuries of experience in helping souls carry burdens that would break them. If you feel the weight becoming too great, my door is always open." It was an offer of help and a reminder of surveillance in equal measure. Then he was gone, leaving Brennan alone in the hallway. The following days were a peculiar form of torture. Brennan tried to lose himself in the dry, saintly biographies. He read of visions, miracles, and martyrdoms, but the words seemed hollow, childish almost. When held against the stark, tragic grandeur of the erased angel, the official narratives of divine justice and celestial order felt like a flimsy stage set, behind which stood a terrifying, more complex truth. He found himself looking at everything differently. During Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, his eyes would scan the magnificent art, the heavens filled with triumphant angels, singing the glory of God. He no longer saw a divine celebration. He saw a propaganda campaign, a deliberate and magnificent overwriting of a painful, alternative history. Every seraph, every cherub, every archangel with a flaming sword, now seemed to stand in silent opposition to the one who was missing, the one who had chosen solidarity over song. The angels' proposed to share in humanity's suffering haunted him. It didn't feel like arrogance. It felt like love of a magnitude the universe was apparently not designed to handle. And the punishment, not fiery torment, but absolute non-existence, was somehow more horrifying. It was a metaphysical murder, a deletion from reality itself. He began to spend his evenings not in prayer, but in frantic, secret research. Using his still active archival credentials, he bypassed the public databases and delved into the most restricted digital indexes, searching for echoes. He looked for coded references, for theological disputes that seemed to circle a void, for any saint or mystic who might have glimpsed the same terrible secret. He found whispers in the writings of a few marginalized medieval mystics. There were mentions of a silent advocate, a companion in shadows. Their descriptions were vague, their orthodoxy always questionable, and their works were invariably marked with warnings or relegated to appendixes as examples of dangerous enthusiasm. A 12th century Cistercian monk, in a text condemned by a local council, wrote of a prayer he had received in a vision: "To the one who kneels where others stand, who weeps where others rejoice, be our solace in the night." The passage had been heavily annotated by a later censor. ***, refer to Veritas Protocol, expunged from future editions. ***. Another echo came from an unlikely source, a fragment of a Greek liturgical hymn, dated to the 5th century, discovered in a desert monastery. One line stood out from the standard praise. And remember also the beloved stranger, whose name is lost to us, who bears our sorrows in a place beyond light. The fragment was stored in the archives with a note, deviant interpolation, not for liturgical use. Origin unknown. The most chilling discovery came from the personal papers of a Roman inquisitor in the 1600s. It was a memo regarding the interrogation of a village wise woman. The charge was heresy. The specific evidence cited was her teaching local children about a nice angel who was sad for us and who lived in the cracks of the world. The inquisitor noted with frustration that the woman was clearly ignorant. Her beliefs are folk superstition with no discernible theological basis. He recommended she be given a penance and released, as she posed no real threat. But in the margin, in a different hand, was a sharp notation. Veritas contamination. Monitor the region for 3 generations. Eradicate the folklore. Brennan sat back, stunned. This was not just a secret kept by popes and theologians. This was a secret that had, somehow, leaked. It had trickled down into the popular consciousness, transforming into folk tales and simple superstitions, only to be systematically hunted and stamped out by the vigilant machinery of the church. The angel was not just erased from heaven. Every memory of him on earth was being meticulously scrubbed away. The sheer scale of the cover-up was overwhelming. It wasn't just about hiding a truth. It was about actively shaping reality, controlling the very boundaries of what was thinkable, what was possible. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He was no longer just a scholar who had stumbled upon a secret. He was a node in a vast ancient network of suppression, and he was now complicit in it. His faith, once a solid rock, was now shifting sand. He could no longer pray. The words felt like lies on his tongue. To whom was he praying? To a God who would unmake a being for the crime of too much compassion. To a celestial hierarchy that demanded obedience over empathy. The image of the fresco, the angel's sorrowful eyes, the stigmatic hands offering comfort had become his true object of meditation, a silent, heretical icon. He was drowning in the knowledge, just as Valenti had predicted. The isolation was absolute. He would look at his fellow priests, see their simple, unwavering faith, and feel a vast distance between them. He was an island, and the ocean that surrounded him was made of a truth he could never share. One night, overwhelmed by a need to see the image again, to confirm it was not a dream, he found himself standing outside the door to the Cappella di San Giovanni della Penitenza. He hadn't planned it. His feet had carried him there of their own accord. He knew it was madness. He was certainly being watched, but the compulsion was too strong. To his astonishment, the door was slightly ajar. A cold dread, different from his previous fear, seized him. This was wrong. It should be locked. Always locked. He pushed the door open slowly. The chapel was dark, but a single work light was shining on the apse, connected to a long extension cord that snaked out the door. The ladder was back in place, and someone was standing on it. It was a man in conservator's coveralls, his back to Brennan. He was not cleaning the fresco. He was carefully applying a thick, dark, paste-like substance over the face of the angel with a palette knife, systematically and expertly covering Raffaelli's work forever. No, the word was out of Brennan's mouth before he could stop it. A raw, desperate cry that ripped through the silent chapel. The man on the ladder started, almost losing his balance. He turned, and Brennan saw he was young, with a nervous, scholarly face. He looked terrified. "Who are you?" Brennan demanded, striding down the aisle. "What are you doing?" I have my orders, Father," the man stammered, clutching the palette knife like a weapon. "From whom?" "From Archbishop Valenti." The man nodded mutely. "Stop this, now," Brennan commanded, a Bethari in his voice he didn't know he possessed. "I can't, Father. The instruction is explicit. The Veritas contamination is to be sealed, permanently, a chemical sealant. It can never be removed without destroying the painting beneath." Brennan stared up at the apse. The angel's face was already half obscured by the ugly, dark gel. It was a second erasure, more final than the first. He felt a physical pain in his chest. "Get down," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The conservator scrambled down the ladder, looking frightened. "I'm just doing my job, Father. Please, don't make trouble." Brennan ignored him, climbing the ladder himself. He reached out and touched the still wet sealant over the angel's eye. It was cold and viscous. It was death in a jar. He looked at the conservator's cart. There were several such jars, along with brushes and tools for the job. The final solution, not just hiding, but annihilating. In that moment, something in Father Brennan broke. The obedient scholar, the faithful priest, was gone. The man who remained was a rebel, an ally of the erased. He descended the ladder and faced the trembling conservator. "You will leave," Brennan said, his voice eerily calm. "You will take your things and you will go. You will tell Archbishop Valenti that Father Brennan was here, that he interrupted you, and that the job is not done." The man didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his cart and fled, the wheels rattling on the stone floor. Brennan was left alone in the chapel. He looked up at the defaced masterpiece, at the angel being swallowed by darkness. Valenti was tightening the noose. The offer of quiet coexistence was withdrawn. The knowledge was not to be carried. It was to be extinguished, and anyone who held it was a threat to be managed. He knew what he had to do. He could not let this stand. He could not be the last witness to this truth. The angel had been erased from heaven, its memory hunted on earth. But it existed here, in this chapel, and in him, he had to preserve it. He had to get the story out. The prison of knowledge had just become a battlefield, and he had chosen his side. The silence in the chapel after the conservator's frantic departure was electric, charged with the aftershock of Brennan's rebellion. He stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs, not with fear now, but with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. He had drawn a line. He had openly defied the prefect of the secret archives. There was no going back. His eyes were drawn to the cart the man had abandoned in his haste. Among the jars of chemical sealant and the tools of erasure, something else lay half-hidden under a cloth. A high-resolution digital camera and a ring flash. Equipment used to document artifacts before, during, and after restoration, or destruction. A wild, desperate idea bloomed in his mind. They were going to wipe the angel from the wall, making it as if Raffaelli's vision had never existed. But they wanted a record of it first, for their own files. For the Sanctorum Arcanum, he would take that record, but not for them. Moving with a speed he didn't know he possessed, Brennan grabbed the camera. It was a sophisticated model, and thankfully, the conservator had already set it up for the low-light conditions. He mounted it on the tripod that stood nearby, his hands trembling, not with nerves, but with purpose. He climbed the ladder again, ignoring the vile sealant that was slowly hardening over the angel's compassionate face. He positioned the camera, framing the apse as perfectly as he could. He set the timer, the camera's soft beep the only sound in the sacred space. The flash popped, illuminating the tragic, beautiful heresy in a stark, clinical light. He moved the camera, again and again, capturing the entire scene in a grid of overlapping high-resolution, imagized the angel's sorrowful eyes, the storm-wrought wings, the outstretched wounded hands, the human souls looking up in awe. Each click of the shutter felt like an act of defiance, a preservation of a soul. He was creating a digital ghost, an echo that could never be completely silenced. He worked quickly, knowing he had minutes at most. Once the last image was captured, he pulled the memory card from the camera. He slipped the tiny rectangle of plastic into his pocket, feeling its weight far exceed its physical mass. It was now the most dangerous object in the Vatican. He then did the only thing he could think of to buy time. He took one of the jars of sealant and, with a grimace of disgust, poured it over the camera and the laptop that was connected to it, ensuring any temporary files stored there were corrupted beyond recovery. It was a petty act of sabotage, but it might delay the discovery that a copy existed. He fled the chapel, not back toward his rooms, but deeper into the Vatican's administrative heart. He needed a computer, one not directly tied to the archives network, one where he could access the outside world. He thought of the press office, which was always busy, its computers used by a rotating cast of journalists and staff. He could get lost there. Slipping into a bustling hallway, he tried to compose himself, to slow his breathing. He nodded at a passing Monsignor, his face a mask of calm purpose. The press office was housed in a modern wing, a world away from the ancient silence of the archives. The air hummed with the sound of printers, phones, and conversations in a dozen languages. He found a terminal in a corner that was temporarily free. Tourists and journalists milled about, nobody paying any attention to another priest checking his email. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He inserted the memory card into the reader. The files loaded, thumbnails of the angel filling the screen. His breath caught. Even in cold, digital form, the image was devastatingly powerful. He couldn't send the images themselves. They were too large, too traceable. They would be intercepted instantly by the Vatican's sophisticated digital monitoring systems, which he knew were among the most advanced in the world, designed to protect the Church's secrets in the modern age. He needed to translate the vision into words, a story, a testament. He opened a public webmail service, creating a new anonymous account with a random string of characters. His recipient, he typed in the email address of the only person he could think of who might listen, who had the courage to handle a story like this. Isabella Rossi, a renowned and notoriously tenacious Italian journalist who specialized in investigating powerful institutions. She had written critically about the Vatican before. She was fearless. His subject line was simple: a story you will not believe. His fingers began to fly, the words pouring out of him in a torrent. He wrote of the hidden diary, the Ouroboros clasp, the terrified cleric. He described Raffaele, the haunted genius, and his patron, the enigmatic cardinal. He detailed the chapel, the brutal defacement, and his own desperate act of preservation. He poured out the Archbishop's warning, the descent into the Sanctorum Arcanum, and the terrifying translation of the angelic script. He described the angel of ultimate empathy, not as a rebel, but as a dissenter, his proposed act of solidarity, and the unspeakable punishment of uncreation. He held nothing back. It was a catharsis, a confession, and a broadcast all in one. He was not just sending an email. He was casting a message in a bottle into a vast digital ocean, hoping against hope it would reach the right shore. They are erasing the final physical evidence as I write this, he typed, his heart pounding. But the truth cannot be It exists here, in these words, and in the images I now hold. They can hunt a memory, but they cannot kill a story. Find this angel, Ms. Rossi. Find him for all of us. He hit send. The screen flickered. A progress bar appeared. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, an error message. Network connection lost. Please try again. A cold dread washed over him. He tried to refresh the page. Nothing. He tried another website. Connection timed out. He looked around. The room was still busy, but he saw now what he had missed before. 2 large Swiss guards had taken up positions at the only 2 exits to the room. They weren't looking at him, but their presence was a blockade. A familiar, calm figure emerged from the crowd of journalists. It was Archbishop Valenti. He was not alone. A younger man in a sharp civilian suit accompanied him, holding a tablet computer. The man had the cold, efficient look of a technocrat. Valenti walked directly to Brennan's terminal. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, like a master whose favorite pupil has failed a simple test. The Vatican's firewall is quite robust, Father Brennan, Valenti said quietly, so only Brennan could hear. It doesn't just keep threats out. It monitors for certain keywords, certain patterns of data. Heresy, erased angel, Sanctorum Arcanum. These trigger immediate alerts, as does the attempted transmission of large, unauthorized image files. The man in the suit handed the tablet to Valenti. On the screen was the entire text of Brennan's unsent email. A fascinating read, Valenti said, scrolling through it. A tragic one. You have not only broken your vow of obedience, you have attempted to sabotage centuries of guardianship. You have tried to unleash a virus. Brennan said nothing. He felt utterly hollow, defeated. The system was too vast, too powerful. The offer of quiet coexistence is revoked, Valenti said, his voice hardening. You are a clear and present danger to the faith. You will be taken to a place where you can no longer cause harm. You will have time to reflect on the gravity of your actions and to pray for your soul. The 2 Swiss guards moved forward, their hands resting meaningfully on their ceremonial halberds. Their expressions were stern, impersonal. What place? Brennan whispered. There are retreats, Father Brennan, Valenti said. Monasteries dedicated to the spiritual care of those who have lost their way. Isolated places, quiet places, where the outside world does not intrude. You will be well cared for, and you will be prevented from doing further damage. It was a polite way of saying he was being disappeared. He would be taken to some remote, fortified monastery, declared to be on a silent retreat, and he would never be heard from again. He would live out his days as a prisoner of the truth he had tried to share. As the guards gently but firmly took his arms, Brennan looked one last time at the computer screen, at the words of his testimony that had never escaped the Vatican's walls. He had failed. The angel would remain erased. The truth would remain buried. He had never felt more alone in his life. The digital ghost had been stillborn. The silence had won. The journey was a blur of imposed silence and moving vehicles. He was escorted not by the ceremonial Swiss guard, but by two large, unsmiling men in plain dark suits, members of the gendarmerie, dello Stato, dello del Vaticano, the real security force whose job was less about pageantry and more about practical, quiet enforcement. They spoke to him only when necessary, their voices low and devoid of inflection. A private car took them from the Vatican to a small, private airstrip on the outskirts of Rome. There, a unmarked helicopter waited, its rotors already turning with a lazy, threatening rhythm. The flight north was a numb, vibrating haze. Brennan looked down as the eternal city gave way to the rolling green hills of Tuscany, then the sharper, snow-dusted peaks of the Emilia-Romagna region. The beauty of the landscape was a cruel joke. He was being taken to a gilded cage in the clouds. They landed in a secluded valley, the helicopter setting down on a manicured lawn beside a severe, beautiful structure that clung to the mountainside. It was the Monastero di San Benedetto, silent, the monastery of the silent Saint Benedict. It looked ancient, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and prayer. It was also, Brennan noted with a sinking heart, incredibly remote. The only road leading to it was a narrow, twisting track that seemed to disappear into the forest below. He was led inside. The air was cold and smelled of old stone and beeswax. The silence here was different from the archives. It was a heavy, enforced quiet, a silence that felt absorbed by the thick walls and the even thicker habits of the monks who lived here. An elderly abbot, with a face like a wrinkled walnut and eyes that held no light, greeted them. He exchanged a few quiet words with Brennan's escorts, nodded once, and accepted a sealed envelope. Without a word, the two men turned and left. Brennan heard the helicopter's engine roar to life and then fade into the distance. He was alone with the abbot. "Father Brennan," the abbot said, his voice a dry rustle. "You are here for spiritual renewal. Your vow of silence begins now. You will speak to no one. You will have no access to the outside world. Your only duties are prayer, contemplation, and manual labor as assigned. Your obedience is to God and to this house. Do you understand?" Brennan nodded, the weight of his isolation settling upon him like a physical shroud. His room was a cell, plain and cold, containing only a narrow bed, a small desk, and a crucifix on the wall. The window looked out onto a breathtaking vista of mountains and sky, a view designed to remind a soul of its own smallness and God's grandeur. To Brennan, it looked only like the walls of a very large prison. The days fell into a brutal, monotonous rhythm. He rose before dawn for matins, spent hours in silent prayer in the frigid chapel, worked in the monastery's vegetable garden or chopping wood, ate meager meals in complete silence, and retired to his cell as darkness fell. The other monks were shadows, their eyes averted. They were, he realized, either like him prisoners of secrets or so devout in their silence that they had become part of the institution as architecture. He fought against despair. He replayed the image of the fresco in his mind, using it as a focal point for his meditation. He was not praying to God. He was communing with the erased. He was, in his own silent way, keeping the angel's memory alive within the very heart of the system that had destroyed him. It was during his work duty, a week into his imprisonment, that the first crack appeared. He was weeding a patch of potatoes, his back aching, his fingers numb with cold. An older monk, his face hidden deep within his cowl, was working beside him. As they moved down the row, their hands brushing against the cold earth, the monk's hand briefly closed around Brennan's wrist. It was a startling, electric contact in the world of enforced non-touch. Brennan froze. The monk didn't look at him. He simply released his grip and moved on. But left behind in Brennan's palm was a small, tightly folded piece of paper. His heart hammered. He waited until the monk was far down the row before he cautiously unfolded it. The paper was brittle, the writing on it a tiny, spidery script. "The compassionate one sees you. You are not alone." Brennan stared at the words, his mind reeling. The compassionate one. It was not a standard title for Christ or the Virgin. It was the same sentiment from the medieval texts, the folk tales. It was a reference to him. This was not a place of mere imprisonment. It was a place of storage for problematic individuals, and among them, it seemed, was a whisper network, a secret society within the secret prison. Days passed. He received no more notes, but he began to watch the other monks differently. He saw the subtle ways they communicated, a slight pause in their work, a particular way of bowing their head in the chapel, a pattern tapped faintly on the refectory table. They were ghosts, but they were ghosts who recognized each other. The next message came a few days later, slipped under his door during the night. This one was longer. They think silence kills memory. It only drives it deeper. The story is older than the church. It is in the dirt, in the stones, in the wind. They cannot scrub it from the world. They can only try to scrub it from us. We remember, we wait, The word was a lifeline. He was not the first to have discovered the angel. He was simply the latest in a long, long line of those who had stumbled upon the truth and been silenced for it. The monastery was not just a prison. It was an archive of living, breathing heresies. And some of those heresies were still alive. The abbot, he realized, was not just a jailer. He was a curator of this collection of silenced minds, tasked with ensuring their dangerous ideas died with them. A plan began to form in Brennan's mind, fragile and desperate. It was no longer about sending an email or exposing a fresco. It was about joining something older, more resilient. It was about becoming part of the whisper. His chance to engage came in the library. The monastery had a small, dusty library of approved devotional texts. He was assigned to clean it. The monk overseeing him was the same one who had given him the first note. As Brennan dusted a high shelf, his fingers brushed against a specific volume, a thick, leather-bound copy of the Lives of the Saints. It was wedged tighter than the others. On a hunch, he worked it free. As he did, a small, flat object, tucked behind the book, fell into his hands. It was a homemade, crudely carved wooden icon. The figure was primitive, almost childish in its execution, but the features were unmistakable. Wings of chaotic lines, a face of sorrow, hands outstretched with tiny dots carved into the palms. He quickly slipped it into his sleeve, his pulse racing. He had found their icon, their secret sacrament. That night, during Compline, he made his move. As the monks filed out of the chapel, he lingered for a moment before the statue of the Virgin Mary. He didn't pray. Instead, with his back to the room, he took the small icon from his sleeve and laid it gently at the statue's feet, a tiny offering of solidarity. He walked away, not looking back. He didn't need to. The next morning, during Lauds, he found the icon back in his cell, placed neatly on his desk. With it was another note. The network is fragile. The risk is death. But the truth is a fire that cannot be extinguished. If you wish to serve him, be ready. A door will open soon. Be prepared to walk through it. The message was clear. They had accepted him. They had a plan. But for what? What could a handful of silenced monks in a remote mountain prison possibly do? The answer came sooner than he expected. 2 days later, a delivery truck labored up the narrow road to the monastery. It was a monthly supply, run food, wine, other necessities. The driver and his helper were known to the monks, a father and son from the village below. As the monks unloaded the supplies under the watchful eye of the abbot, the older driver, a grizzled man with a kind face, caught Brennan's eye. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. Then, as he handed Brennan a sack of flour, he pressed something small and hard into his hand. It was a cheap, disposable mobile phone. Brennan's blood turned to ice. He concealed it instantly, slipping it into the deep pocket of his habit. His mind raced. This was it, the open door. The driver was part of the network. The whisper extended beyond these walls, down into the world below. That night, in the absolute silence of his cell, under the cover of his rough blanket, he powered on the phone. The glow of the screen was a shocking beacon in the darkness. It had a single number pre-programmed into it, and one text message, received hours earlier. It was from Isabella Rossi, the journalist. Your message got through. The firewall caught it, but not before a copy was cached on a public server I monitor for unusual activity. I believe you. Tell me everything. How can I help? Brennan stared at the words, tears of relief and terror welling in his eyes. His message in a bottle had been found. The digital ghost had escaped. The silence had been broken. The war for the angel's memory had just begun. The story exploded later that day. Isabella Rossi, a trusted name in journalism, didn't just report a rumor. She reported a meticulously documented investigation with a source inside the Vatican, physical evidence, and a stunning raid on a remote monastery. She didn't just talk about a hidden painting. She framed it within Brennan's entire story: the doctrine of erasure, the angel of ultimate empathy, the systemic, centuries-long cover-up. The world reacted with a mixture of shock, fascination, and outrage. The Vatican, caught completely off guard, went into immediate damage control. Their first statement was a masterpiece of obfuscation, calling the reports fantastical and irresponsible, a conspiracy theory, and denying any knowledge of the so-called monastery of the silent Saint Benedict as a place of detention. But the dam had broken. Other news outlets picked up the story. Historians and theologians were hauled onto news shows, their reactions ranging from outright dismissal to stunned acknowledgement that the story, while incredible, fit patterns of historical suppression. The digital image Brennan had risked everything to take began to circulate online, the angel's sorrowful, powerful face emerging from the shadows, a haunting ghost in the global machine. Archbishop Valenti was recalled to Rome. Brennan saw him on a small television in the abbot's office before the Italian authorities took control of the monastery. Valenti looked older, weary, but his voice was steely as he denied all allegations, portraying Brennan as an unstable scholar who had misinterpreted historical materials and concocted a dangerous fantasy. But it was too late. The tapestry of silence was unraveling. In the days that followed, others began to come forward. An art restorer in Naples confessed his family had passed down a story of a great-grandfather who had worked on a blasphemous angel in the Vatican before disappearing. A historian in Prague found a previously overlooked reference in an alchemical text to the Star of Compassion, cast out of the heavenly court. The folklorists report Brennan had found about the village wise woman and the nice angel was rediscovered and published. The Whisper network had gone global. Brennan was not taken back to the Vatican. He was taken into protective custody by the Italian authorities, a material witness in a criminal investigation into art destruction and unlawful imprisonment. He sat in a safe house, watching the world heave and fracture on a television screen. He had done it. He had told the story. But as he watched the talking heads debate, the theologians argue, the artists create their own interpretations of the angel, he felt a strange emptiness. The pure, terrible truth he had discovered in the archives had now become public property, a thing to be debated, merchandised, The angel was free, but it was no longer his. It belonged to the world now, to be misunderstood, simplified, and fought over. He had won his freedom, but the battle for the angel's meaning had just begun. And he knew, with a cold certainty, that the Vatican was not finished. They had lost a skirmish, but they had protected their secret for 500 years. They were masters of the long game. Their response would not be a denial for much longer. It would be a counterattack, and it would be merciless. The world did not end. Cathedrals did not crumble. But something fundamental shifted. The story of the erased angel, the Angelus Veritas, did not become a new dogma. It became a permanent, open question etched into the consciousness of faith. Father Leo Brennan, no longer a priest in good standing, became a reluctant figurehead. He lived a quiet life under a new name, a ghost himself, watching the aftermath from a distance. The Vatican, after initial furious denials, adopted a new strategy: silent acknowledgement. They never confirmed the doctrine of erasure, but they ceased their active suppression. The monastery of San Benedetto Silent was quietly secularized and turned into a historical site. The sealed chapel in the Vatican was officially designated under permanent restoration. The angel, in its digital and imagined forms, proliferated. It appeared in murals on city streets, in songs, in sermons of progressive congregations. It became a symbol for the outcast, the empath, the heretic, the questioner. For some, it was a dangerous deviation. For others, it was the most Christian story never told. Brennan often thought of Archbishop Valenti's warning about a theological virus. The man had been right. The idea was out now, and it could not be contained. It did not destroy faith. It complicated it. It introduced a note of divine tragedy, of cosmic solidarity, that many found more profound than perfect celestial order. One evening, looking at a photograph of the revealed fresco, the image that had started it, all Brennan understood. The angel's work was not in being worshipped, but in being remembered. Its rebellion was not defiance. but a love so vast it chose to share the burden of existence. The Vatican had tried to erase an angel from heaven. In doing so, they had ensured it would forever have a place on earth. And in the quiet of his room, Leo Brennan, the keeper of the secret, finally found a prayer again. It was not to God or to the angel. It was a simple, grateful thought sent into the darkness. You are not forgotten.